All right, I think we are live. Hello everybody. Welcome to this live stream that we are doing this afternoon. My name is Colin Postma. I am the Federal Manager for ARPA Canada, and with me is Andre Schutten, Director of Law and Policy for ARPA Canada. We're coming to you from our Ottawa office here, and we want to talk about Bill C7, which is currently before the Justice Committee as we speak. The reason we wanted to talk about it a little bit more is just after perusing through our website and some of the our Facebook posts as well, we felt that we maybe hadn't given it enough focus in the last couple of months, especially since the prorogation of Parliament, and now that the bill is fully going through the House, through the readings, through Justice Committee. We felt it was time to give it another shot, to just take a look at this and help you as well, our viewers, our supporters, to understand this bill and to also be able to be informed to go out and do something about it as well. Mm-hmm. So Andre, did you want to just start by giving us a bit of an assessment of the bill, just a real basic description of what it's doing again, just to refresh our mind?
For sure. So this bill is a bit more radical than I think a lot of people realize. Certainly what instigated this bill was a court case in Quebec where a lower court judge struck down some of the limits, some of the safeguards that were in the old euthanasia law. Now that old euthanasia law was merely 3 years old or so not very old at all. But a judge said that the safeguard in there that limited assisted suicide to the very end of life, to somebody who is dying already, maybe faces 24, 48, 72 hours, that it would be available for those people who are dying to end their life a little bit earlier with the help of a doctor. That's what the old euthanasia law was supposed to be for, and so a judge struck down that limit, saying no, it's for anybody, any adult who is suffering in a way that they themselves find intolerable, whether that's because of pain or because of a disability or because of a particular disease, that they should also have access to assisted suicide. And so it's actually really quite radical. And in this bill, Bill C7, which is Parliament's response to this lower court judgment, this new law will try to answer that lower court judge's decision. Now, I should first note, of course, that ARPA is very disappointed, as are many doctors and concerned disability rights groups, that the federal government did not appeal that decision. They really should have pushed harder, sent it to the Quebec Court of Appeal and then on to the Supreme Court of Canada, because frankly, that lower court judge's decision, I think, is not sound. It is not legally sound, and certainly a reading of the Supreme Court of Canada's earlier decision, I don't think justified that decision. But anyway, we're stuck here with Bill C7. And so when we look at that bill, and we've analyzed it with our lawyers here at ARPA Canada, there's a number of different problems. I could go through pages and pages of the problems, but I just want to limit it to a few. So first of all, what it does is the bill eliminates additional safeguards in the older euthanasia law. So one of those safeguards was a 10-day waiting period. Now that waiting period is not to the purpose of that waiting period is not just to be a pain for people who are trying to access assisted suicide. No, it's because people who are suicidal, those suicidal thoughts vary. They go up and down. There are times when people in a very depressed moment will ask for their life to be ended, but that can change. And we know that from all kinds of studies that have showed that a person's suicidality will ebb and flow, particularly if they're facing a hard prognosis or a hard diagnosis from a disease, or if they are suffering pain. And so we put that 10-day waiting period in there for a reason, and that is to make sure that, in fact, somebody who's requesting death has this persistent desire to die. That safeguard has been removed. Now, it's been removed for people who are dying, but of course, this law, Bill C7, has also expanded euthanasia and assisted suicide to people who aren't dying. And so if you're a person who is suffering but not dying and you request assisted suicide, well, then you have a 90-day waiting period. The problem in this bill is that there's no guidance whatsoever for a doctor to determine which track are you on. Do you benefit from 90 days in which time you can change your mind, or do you not get that benefit and you're put down the fast track where you could request assisted suicide and within an hour you might be getting that lethal injection. Now, we have evidence from doctors who do assisted suicides, who kill their patients, where they've admitted in court documents or in public documents like op-eds, where they've admitted that for them, somebody who's dying might still have 10 years left to live. So that means if you have a disease, perhaps cancer that's terminal, and you still have 5 years to go, or perhaps you have a degenerative disease, perhaps something like spinal muscular atrophy, where you have an estimated 10 years left in your life. Well, some euthanasia doctors think, oh, you don't even get to benefit from that 90-day period. Instead, you get access today. And so if you're in a particularly depressed moment today and you make that request today, well, you're going to get your lethal injection today. How is that compassionate? How is that fair for people within the disability community? So big problems there. Also, for no reason that I can understand, they've also removed one of the two witness requirements. So before, in the old law, you required two witnesses to any euthanasia or assisted suicide. Well, they've reduced that to one. Now, why? Like, why in the world would you say, a doctor is killing their patient and we're going to remove a witness? What, if anything, we should be adding witnesses. We should be requiring, audio visual recordings of these kinds of things. Because again, remember, there's no way to double check whether or not the law was followed. Because if the law is not followed, we're not talking about just anything. We're talking about a homicide. So. I'm just going to pause there and double check. Are we doing okay with this live stream, or are we frozen?
No, we are on. It's just a preview.
Okay, we're still good. Okay, sorry about that. So I was saying that this independent witness, we need to make sure we have two independent witnesses that are not going to be, that are truly independent. They're not making money from this particular transaction, nothing like that, that they're truly independent. And I think that as well, so one other problem, of course, is that this bill, again, that the court judgment didn't even require this from Quebec. This bill also adds an allowance for people to make advance directives. Now, this law uses different language, but in effect, that's what they've done. They've allowed for somebody to give advance consent to their own death. And that's really problematic. It's really problematic because there's going to be somebody who perhaps, maybe even you feel this way. It's like you think to yourself, oh, if I were to lose my mental capacity in the future, as an able-bodied Canadian right now in this moment, oh, shucks, I wouldn't want to live like that. And so I think, I'd rather just not have to live at all. Well, you're making that consideration from a point in time where you are an able-bodied, capable person. But you don't know what that you would be like in that moment when you lose the mental capacity to give consent. Who knows? Maybe once you're living in that position, you might actually want to continue living. And so that's why in with certain crimes, the criminal code does not allow for consent in advance. You have to be giving consent always at the moment. For example, sexual assault law is built that way. You have to be able to give consent in the moment. You can't give consent in advance and then when you're incapacitated, you're stuck with whatever decision you made before. No, in the moment you have to be always giving consent. And so we should extend the same principle to assisted suicide. So that's just some of the problems, Colin, with this bill. There's many more, but they're probably a bit more technical, and we don't really have time to get into all of them now. So.
One of the aspects you were talking about there, it made me think that people often, some of the criticisms they have for some of the things you're talking about is that they're barriers to access. Mm-hmm. Why do we disagree with that perspective, and how would you argue with somebody who's saying that? Like, we're just trying to remove those barriers. Like, these poor people are in that situation. Then a 10-day waiting period is more reasonable than a 90-day waiting period, and no waiting period is more reasonable than a 10-day one, let's say.
Yeah. I think it starts on an assumption that suicide is a human right, but of course we wouldn't say that. I mean, if we had a young teenager who's struggling with depression, and is standing on the edge of a bridge, we don't say, okay, let's move all the barriers to that person being able to jump off that bridge and end their life. No, we do whatever we can to help that person who has these suicidal thoughts, who has these suicidal desires. And so whenever somebody has a suicidal cry that they're asking for their life to end, that's a cry for help. And so our response is not say, okay, how can we help you end your life? Our response as a society, as physicians, as family members, as parliamentarians, lawmakers, is not, okay, we got to do whatever we can to help them end their life. Our answer always has to be, we got to do whatever we can to help them with the help that they need, which is to end their suffering, to end their loneliness, to end their sense of isolation, their sense of maybe they sense or feel like they've lost some dignity, or they feel like they're a burden on another person. Well, address those things. That's what we need to address. We don't need to address simply saying, okay, you want to end your life, okay, we're going to help you end your life. In fact, what informs an answer like that is something called ableism. So it's in there with the other isms like racism and those kinds of isms. Well, ableism is where able-bodied people look at somebody with a disability and make certain assumptions about those people. And it's ableism that looks at somebody who is disabled because of disease or age or some other disability, looks at them and says, that life is not worth living. And so in my able-bodied, privileged position, I'm going to look at that person, and when they say, I want to die, I think, yeah, if I were you, I would want to die too, and so I'm going to help you die. That's ableism. Compassionate care for somebody with a disability, compassionate care and love for somebody with a very hard diagnosis of cancer or something like that, compassionate care for somebody with an advanced age, dementia, and so on, is to not look at that person as being, primarily a disabled person or a person with a disability, rather to see them as a person first, a human being with dignity first, and then to address their concerns and their needs. And so I think that's the big difference. If you look through a lens that says that person's asking for suicide and I got to do everything I can to give them suicide, then there's something wrong with your fundamental assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's really where, that's a great segue actually into the Care Not Kill campaign that we put together. It's a project we've put together over the last year or so, specifically looking at what can we do to change that particular narrative around this question. But just before we get to that, I do want to ask, where is it at now? So you mentioned Justice Committee. Yeah. What does that mean?
Right. So it's had a bit of this bill C7, has had a bit of a complicated road to ride this past year. It was first introduced back in, I believe it was in February, and so it was around through the beginning of the COVID pandemic, but then Parliament was prorogued over the summer, and so that resets the legislative agenda. So it got reintroduced in September, and given the same number, actually C7, so it's the same number. And so it was introduced in Parliament late September, maybe early October. It's been debated briefly in the House of Commons, and then there's a vote at second reading. So the vote at second reading pushes the bill to the Justice Committee to be studied there. And that Justice Committee, it can be amended. So where there are problems in the bill, that's where they call witnesses and experts, and they hear testimony from all kinds of different people, including physicians and people with disabilities who might be affected by a bill like this directly. And they listen to other policy analysts. ARPA Canada ourselves actually are going to be presenting to the Justice Committee on Tuesday and giving our perspective on it, making suggestions as well for amendments to the bill as well. So once that process happens, the committee studies the bill, and they look for ways to tweak and improve the language of the bill. Then they'll go through what's called a clause by clause. So they'll go through every clause of the bill, see if they want to keep it the way it is, change it. Once it's tweaked or changed, they send it back to the House of Commons, and then there will be a vote in that House of Commons at third reading, it's called. And that vote, if it passes, sends the bill to Senate. Same process, exact same process happens in the Senate. And then if the Senate passes it, it goes to the Governor General to be signed into law. So that's the process we're at right now.
And from what I understand, the process in the Justice Committee is being kind of streamlined to a degree, right? Like that, we just heard from a couple of other stakeholder groups that they didn't get access to present to the Justice Committee. We did, thankfully, but you've only got 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. So it looks like it's moving very, very quickly at the Justice Committee. Again, when you think back to C-14, so that was the bill 3 or 4 years ago that first legalized assisted suicide in Canada, and there they took them a lot longer to consult. I think they studied that bill very intensively. I think they were doing committee meetings nearly every day for long periods of time, getting all kinds of people to testify. I mean, then ARPA Canada also presented. Then we had Peter Harsefort and James Shooten join us and give their testimony at the committee. We had a full 10 minutes to make our initial opening statement and then took questions as well. So yeah, it just seemed like they were taking it much more seriously there. This time it seems much more rushed, which is really unfortunate. Also because some of the loudest voices against this bill are actually physicians groups and disability rights groups. Okay, the two groups that would have the most at stake in this debate are the ones that are the loudest against it. There's right now an open letter signed by verified physicians in Canada, so they're Canadian and they're verified as physicians, and that list is over 900. I don't even know how many it is anymore, but the last time I checked, over 900 physicians willing to sign their name on an open letter to the Prime Minister begging him to not go down this route. And then the vast majority of disability rights groups are also saying, let's not go here. Okay, that this is a radical shift to say that we're going to allow you to assist in your death while you're dying, in your dying days. That's one thing. I mean, we believe at ARPA that's a step too far already. It opens the door to saying it's okay for physicians to kill their patients. But it's one thing to say we're gonna end your life a little bit earlier when you're in the dying process, your dying moments. It's a whole nother thing to say, when you're 18 years old and beyond, if you're suffering and you don't like your suffering, and it's physical and you can't tolerate it and you don't want to consider other options, you get access to assisted suicide. That's a massive radical shift, and that's why doctors and disability rights groups are saying, no, this is wrong. This is not the way we want to do this. This is bad medicine. This isn't medicine at all, and it totally marginalizes the disability community.
That was actually going to be my next question, because you guys signed on to a stakeholder or onto a document as well, right?
Right.
John and yourself, from legal experts as well on this issue.
Yeah. So there's also a open letter. It's over 150 legal professionals, lawyers, judges, and others who signed on to also a probably not judges actually. Probably if judges, they would have been retired judges, but certainly 150 plus lawyers who've signed on to a letter as well, expressing grave legal concerns about the law itself, how it impacts, again, the human rights of people within the disability community in particular. Now, something that's somewhat interesting is that when there's done public polling in Canada over the last number of years about people in favor of euthanasia and assisted suicide, lawyers are more likely than any other group in Canada to be in favor of assisted suicide, and doctors are more likely than any other group professionally to be against assisted suicide. And frankly, on this one, I'm with the doctors. I think we got to listen to the doctors on this one. This is a bad move for medicine. It completely undermines the trust relationship between doctors and their patients.
All right, well, I think I'd like to segue then into the section, what can you do? That's I hope the reason you're watching this video. You've understood the concerns that we have with Bill C-7. And so I'd like to point you to a couple of different things that you can do to make a difference on this issue. So as we mentioned, this is at the Justice Committee right now. So if you have a computer, if you're on your mobile device, whatever, go to arpacanada.ca/C7. So that's our action page that we put together that specifically gives you a couple of things that you can do to reach out both to your Member of Parliament and to those who are on the Justice Committee. So those Justice Committee members have all been carbon copied on the easy mail, for instance, that we have put on that landing page. So I direct you there first. Secondly, as I mentioned, the Care Not Kill campaign is something that we've been working on long term. And it's something that we hope to also continue. But part of that has been just a fantastic amount of support from individuals like yourselves on the ground delivering flyers just like this one here. So I've got a stack of 150. We've had several thousand going out just in the last couple of weeks all across the country. And what they do, so it's very simple. It doesn't have a whole lot on the card itself. The idea is really to just raise questions, to raise the questions, as Andre mentioned, about suicide, prevention or assist of those suicides. And then on the back it just explains that the Canadian government is looking to expand assisted suicide. So folks have been putting these in mailboxes, indoors, all across the country in various provinces. And really just helping to drive the public, the Canadian public, to the Care Not Kill website. And the focus of that website is really an apologetic, I guess, for why we're opposed to Bill C-7. Some of the arguments Andre used about caring, providing that care. When do we stop providing care for those who are, maybe have depression or who are asking for the end of for an end to their life, right? So that we understand that when someone asks for an end to their life, that's a call for help. At least that's how we should understand that. And we believe at ARPA Canada and other organizations like the ones you mentioned who signed on to those documents, that's the primary goal. That's what we as Canadians should be most concerned about. And so that's what the Care Not Kill campaign is focused on. I want to just touch on one other element that we have as part of that campaign, these postcards. So this is something we haven't touched on a lot, but I think it's worth mentioning here, and that is that you can actually send these free of charge to your Member of Parliament here in Ottawa. They come in a pack of 50, so if you want to grab a bunch and hand them out at church or leave them on a table somewhere that they'd be signed and sent in to their Member of Parliament, that would be fantastic. Now is the time to do that. So those are some of the elements that we're doing, that we're working on to also try and oppose this legislation, and also to ask our members of Parliament to provide some of the amendments that Andre has already mentioned. I just want to double check on the website to make sure I covered off on anything. The one last thing I do want to mention as well is, of course, prayer is necessary in this time. So we'd ask you to pray for our government leaders as they consider this legislation. Pray that they would also understand the concerns that we have, the concerns that you have, that they would take that and then make those amendments to that legislation and to oppose both the expansion of assisted suicide in Canada, but also the provision of assisted suicide in Canada itself. Is there anything else we should touch on?
Yeah, I think that to wrap it up, I'd say just remember that this is very personal for all of us. I'm certain that just like Colin and I know, many people in our lives, family members, friends, neighbors, members of our church communities, and so on, who have limitations, who have physical limitations, who have maybe mental limitations. They've been maybe diagnosed with a debilitating disease, or they're just very frail and late on in life. And what this bill does is says that for some of those people, their life is not worth living, or at least if ever they become suicidal, they don't deserve the help that any of the rest of us deserve. Like if Colin were ever to or if myself, if either of us were ever to become suicidal because of depression, we would be given all of the help that we deserve as human beings. And yet some of our friends and family members, simply because of their disability or their disease, would not be given that same help. At least not by our government, not by our courts, not by some within our medical community. And that's plainly wrong. And so we as Christians are called to be a voice for justice, for truth, for compassion. And this is one way that you can speak up for justice and compassion for the least of these. And so I pray that you also will be willing to stand and be counted and add your voice to the chorus that's saying, let's not go here. Let's stand up for and protect all vulnerable Canadians. So thanks so much for tuning in, and hopefully you'll join us in this.
From Ottawa, thanks for watching.